Hello everyone. Just sending up the necessaries. And I think it's, oh, there we are. Hopefully you guys can see this all right, but anyway, I'm just going to begin. Can you guys read this? All right, so yeah, today's talk is going to be about photographic exposure. And the thing is this, a lot of people ask me about painting, they ask me about coloring, how to make something, you know, how do you paint something so it looks nice? And one of the things that we look for in photo, like one of the things that people like when you have a painting is, you know, that photorealistic effect. So that's why I think I want to talk about photographic exposure and talk a bit about how cameras deal with exposure and deal with light. So one thing you know I want to talk about is white, white light, or actually white in a picture. If we look at this camera, you're going to see that there's that big spot of white outside. It's bright outside. I've opened my blinds up so that, you know, it's a lot of light is coming in. You're probably not going to be able to tell this with this camera, but the sky is actually a nice deep blue. Well, it's actually kind of a shallow blue. And the thing is that this camera still shows it as white. And you'll notice that you can still see what's going on over there on the wall. You can still see what's going on in terms of shadow. Like, those are shaded areas. You can still see the detail in those areas. You can still see a fair amount of detail down here as well. So that's kind of the funny thing about photographic exposure is that, you know, even though sitting in here using my own eyes, the human eye is going to be capable of seeing detail in those kind of mid-tone shaded areas. Your eye is going to be able to see shadows down, like little details in those little areas. You're going to be able to see how the sky is blue. You're going to be able to see a whole range of different values. You can sense, you know, the human eye is really an amazing thing in that it can sense something like 24, I don't know, I heard somewhere that it was like you could sense maybe 24 different f-stops of, you know, intense light. But in the case of this camera, the camera can only handle maybe 8 or even less than that. And this is just a, you know, like it's a you know, security camera / webcam. So the thing is that, watch this, if I take my hand, okay, and I start closing it up over this camera, watch what's going to happen. Look at what happens to the light from the window. It's becoming, it almost seems to be getting more and more intense, because what this camera is trying to do is this camera is trying to it's adjusting, you know, for the reduced light. As I close my hand up over this camera, look at that, you know, the camera is adjusting so it can see within this dark space of my hand. But if I take my hand away, look at that. Look what happens. Camera's adjusting. It's letting more light in so that I can see what's going on inside the dark spaces of my hand. When I take my hand away, it's blinded momentarily. All right. So the thing is that whenever you're dealing with a painting and you're trying to get this photographic effect, you have to think the way a camera does. You can't approach things the same way that the human eye would. Isn't that great? You know, the thing is that you're having to deal with a limited gamut, a limited range of color. So, you know, the thing is that when you're painting something, you have to consider what do you want to see? Do you want to see what's going on in the shadows like this, or do you want to see what's going on, you know, in the highlights, in this bright overexposed region? Now, anytime you have overexposure, all right. In the case of this camera, it's got, I think cameras have different photoreceptors. At least the human eye is going to have photoreceptors that sense red, green, and blue. And if we just imagine that a camera has the same thing, you know, able to sense red, green, and blue, the thing is this, that the camera can only sense red, green, and blue up to a certain maximum. And then it cannot sense more. You know, if you throw more light at it, it won't know anymore. It just simply says, I'm maxed out. When I close up on this camera and the camera starts adjusting, what it does is it starts changing the range of where it gets maxed out, and it also anytime you find black areas, you're going to find it's very hard to make this camera perceive black unless I really close my hand up over this. The black areas, those are underexposed areas. So black is going to occur in areas where you have underexposure, and white's going to appear in areas where you have overexposure. And so white is going to appear when you have when the camera is adjusted for the surroundings. Okay, that means that anything that's brighter than these surroundings is going to wind up overexposed. So as you can see, it's white out there. Now if I take my flashlight again, let me get that flashlight. Now watch this. You're going to see that when I turn on this flashlight, the flashlight is also going to be bright white. Watch what happens when I get really, really close to the camera though. Now, we're right up to that flashlight. I have not changed the intensity on this flashlight one bit. The camera has adjusted for it though. And it's adjusted, it's crunched everything down to the point where we can actually see the details in the little bulbs of this, the LED bulbs of this light. We can actually see details in these areas that were once fully, overexposed. Isn't that neat? So the thing is that if you, but besides looking at this light, look everywhere else. Everywhere else is black. You're not seeing anything. It's total darkness. And the reason why is because the camera had to adjust so that it could crunch down the f-stop, it could crunch down the f-stop or the exposure time to the point where, there wasn't enough light to overexpose from these little LED bulbs. But as a result, all of the surroundings dropped out. All of the surroundings had dropped out to black. So if I take that away, see that? So whenever you're going to paint something, you have to choose what you're going to expose for. If you want to see details sitting in the these bright highlights outside, if you want to see the details going on outside that window right now, then you're going to have to crunch down the f-stop a fair bit. So if I'm going to blind this camera for a bit, and you look out the window. Okay, you're going to see detail. Look at that. I'm blinding the camera. See that? When I blind the camera, you can see the outdoor scene. You can see cars moving around and stuff. When I take the camera away, when I take the bright light away, now you can see what's going on out here, but you can't see what's going on outside. So that's the thing, that you're dealing with a limited dynamic range of light. You can only handle intensities of a certain brightness and a certain darkness, and anything that is outside of that range, not going to show up. If it's white, it's overexposed. Now, I'm going to take this camera again, and let's look at, look at that red LED. I've got a little bright operating light on that box over. See, that's that little red LED. Now here's the thing. Look at the core of that LED. It's white. It's overexposed. But why do we know that it's red if that core is white? It's because the outside of that white highlight, it's surrounded by a reddish halo, a reddish fringe. And if you look at this outdoor scene, you'll find that there's a slightly bluish fringe from the blue sky. Even if I look at this, if I put my arm over it, look at that blue halo fringe, where my black sweater is. Look at that. That's the blue of the sky. It's just that blue, that light, that bluish light is so intense that it's overexposing the camera and it appears as white. White is what happens when all of the red, green, and blue photoreceptors are maxed out. If they're all maxed out, if everything's maxed out, all you get is 255, 255, 255 white. But the fringe is not maxed out, and that's why you can see color in the fringe. So anytime you have to simulate a very, very bright light source, then what you have to do is you have to look at the fringe to figure out the color. So you'll find, lights very often will have a tinted fringe, like those red lights and whatnot. Now, just looking around again. You'll see all these little areas. Some areas are overexposed. Look at that. when I turn the camera downwards, look at that, this phone book here, look how overexposed it is, all that light falling on it. Now, if enough light falls on an area, it can overexpose if your camera's not set up for it. So you'll see, look how that exposure is constantly changing. Just keep your eye on this area. Look how it's white, and now it's back in the midtones. When I look at this computer monitor, right now it's properly exposed for the monitor, but look at the details in here, all those wires and stuff, they're all gone. When I point it down there, here if I just dismount the camera, I'm going to dismount the camera again. Now you can see the details, you can see little shines in the wires and whatnot. When I take it away though and point it at this monitor, all that detail is lost because the camera had to expose for the brightness of that monitor. And it wound up crushing everything else. So let's apply this. Let's do a little bit of painting. Deal with some of this photographic exposure business. Put my light there. Okay. So one thing about my paintings that you'll notice that I typically start with this dark neutral gray background as opposed to starting on white. And the reason for that is because if you're starting on white, you're basically assuming that the entire scene is overexposed. When you start on a dark neutral gray, then it's possible to punch holes. I always think of my lighting as punching holes in things. You know, it's like if I have a flashlight that is shining into a room, I think of the aperture of the flashlight as being, you know, a hole. But then, right, you know, but then I think the thing is this, is that if you punch a hole, you know, into something, and you have light shining through, you can't really tell the difference between, you know, a flashlight and just a bright hole. Now, if I take, here, let me just scribble a quick ground in there. I'm going to punch a hole in the ceiling, and I'm going to extend it. I'm going to just tear open the ceiling a bit. So we have a bit of a crack forming. Now I use white again, you know, because basically indoors, we have a very, very bright light source outside, and now I can start casting light. So some of that light is going to be spilling onto the ground, like that. Kind of a neat effect, isn't it? And if I want to make it seem as if, let me put this, I'm going to add an additive layer right on top of that. If I want to make it seem like it's a blue sunny day out, then I'm going to choose my nice sky blue, choose an airbrush, not a hairbrush, an airbrush. And I can fringe. See that? I can just fringe that bright light with that blue sky tone. It is really that simple. If you want to get the sense that there is skylight out there, what you do not do is you don't paint a blue sky. You paint white, and you properly expose things in your scene, and yeah. And if you want it to appear like there's sunlight that's striking the ground, then I'm taking this dim, dull orange. I've got my brush set on additive mode. I'm working on an additive layer, and it's the same thing. I just fringe this area of overexposure with that. Maybe that's a little too saturated, so I'm going to just turn that down, and let's try this less, not so saturated. Right. And yeah, it is really as simple as that. And let's see, let's do some more stuff. You know, you can put in flakes. I tend to concentrate the flakes near the areas of overexposure, like that, and also up here. a few in the middle, not as much. All right, pretty simple. So this is how you deal with the areas of overexposure. And as for the areas of underexposure, that would be these other shadowed regions. Let's get back to let's get that camera out here again. Yeah, okay. Now, I've talked about the overexposure areas. Areas that are white are going to be overexposed. Areas that are overexposed are going to wind up white. That's going to mean direct light sources that you stare at directly, like that. That's going to be white. You stare at a flashlight, you're going to get some white on that. Laser beams, sometimes computer monitors, because these emit light. You're going to get white on that. You're going to find a lot of spots of white, even on this thing here. Look, this is not a light source. This is a specular reflection. So specular reflection, mirrors cause specular reflections. You're going to find the special thing about a specular reflection as opposed to a diffuse reemission. This is a, here, let's get Dr. Evil over here. This is a diffuse reemission, and there's also a bit of a specular component to this. Specular reflection is special in that the light does not break up. It's maybe a good way for me to explain here. Let me get this laser pointer working. I took the batteries out of it for a second hand. I got this green laser pointer from a surplus store for like $30. Green laser pointers are so cool. Okay. Now, oh, did I put the batteries in backwards? Oh no, it's working. It just has to warm up. Ah, there we are. Okay. So, green laser pointer. Put that away. Okay, so on this mirror, I'm going to take the green laser pointer. I'm going to hold it in a place so you can see it. Oh, you can see the dot on that one. Hold on a second. Let me get a better mirror. Okay, I'm back. These mirrors, here we are. This is a high-grade optical mirror, and it was once used in a piece of analytical equipment. Wow. Look at that. This, I mean, I tell you, you cannot compare these mirrors. Look at the clarity of that picture. My goodness, it's like holding a little hole. It's a very, very highly polished mirror. Now, I'm going to take the laser beam again, And if I shoot it, if I shoot it at this mirror, oh, you can still kind of see the dot. Maybe it's because there's dust on this mirror. Yeah, there is. I don't really want to. I'm going to try and wipe that down. Okay. Well, looks like you can still see the spot somewhat, but not very well. Okay, so the thing about a specular reflection, is that the beam is not really broken up. You'll find that if I take this mirror, let's point it, oops, there we are. When I use my hand, look at that. You'll see that the beam is bouncing. There's my hand, there's the beam on my hand, but if I point it at the mirror, the beam doesn't break up at all. The beam stays coherent. That's a specular reflection. A specular reflection does not distort the light rays that strike it. If this mirror was really perfect, then you wouldn't see that dot at all. I was hoping that this one would not show it. But the thing is that the mirror is actually worn out. That's probably why they took it off of the equipment. Okay. So, on the other hand, if you look at something that is like, let me get something else. Here. Like this. This is a diffuse reflection. All right. If I shine the beam at it, the thing is that the beam is visible. Look how much brighter that beam is, and it's visible from all directions. It doesn't matter where that laser is pointing. And you can also see that there's a specular reflection. See that white highlight? That white highlight, that's what's going on outside. So that means you're going to find white anytime you're staring directly at a light source like that, or if you have a specular reflection of another direct light source. If you have direct light source that's striking something like that, you'll get white as well. And as for diffuse reemission, this is when you can see that something is kind of a beige color, or when you can see that something is painted. You can tell this is kind of this painted robin's egg blue color. What's happening with diffuse, the thing is that when you have diffuse reemission, this is where light is being absorbed into a surface and re-emitted. This is why I call it diffuse reemission. So you've got white light that's coming in from outdoors. It's striking this plastic bus, and it's being absorbed, and only certain wavelengths are being re-emitted as visible light. The rest of it is all being re-emitted as infrared. It'll heat up. So, and the thing about a diffuse reemission is that the light beam is scattered in all directions. And as to do with underexposure, underexposure is whenever you have something that's black. So black is you're gonna get black in a few different situations. Either whenever something is absorbing all of that light, like this black material here, and you don't have and the material is not angled in such a way that it reflects a specular reflection back at the camera, that's when you get black. It's also, you'll get black whenever light can't get into an area. So if I close up my hands, this is ambient occlusion, or I like to call it enclosure, right? When I close up my hands, that means that light from bouncing from the walls and the ceiling and whatnot, they can't get into this dark little space, so they're going to turn black. So it's good to know where your light sources are. I'll go and I'll paint the areas that are overexposed. I'll paint these bright holes. Then I'll go in and I'll start finding the areas that are enclosed. Oops, yeah, that's right. And darken them up like that. Now, maybe I should get a better example here. I'm just going to create a little bit of surface form because this stuff is hard to deal with if you're just drawing with paints and don't have any sort of guideline. Okay, so let me get a quick landscape doodle in here. Okay. Okay, I'm going to put a bit of an overhang. I'm purposely creating a crevice in here. Okay, so there's a crevice. Okay, so let's paint this up. And this time, so I need my sky. And actually I'm going to expose the scene for the sky. So in that case, I'm going to cut a hole where there's no clouds. Clouds are special in that they scatter whatever light you throw at them. Okay. And maybe I can punch a few holes in there, but that's good enough. Alright, so now we've got some sunlight that's coming down, and I'm going to make it strike a few key areas. These are areas where we're going to get some specular. These are all the upward facing surfaces. If you do it right, you know, every single brush stroke that you put in should feel like it's actually in there. You know, hey Casimir, every time you throw in a brush stroke, it should, you know, it should feel more and more real. You know if you're doing things right if the illusion is getting better and better. Every brush stroke must be there to reinforce the illusion. Okay. Now that I've got that, I'm not going to deal with the diffuse component just yet. The reason why I call it a diffuse component is because whenever you look at an object, like this one for instance, there's many things going on. There's a little bit of diffuse on this blue thing, all right? That's one component of the light that's coming back. When I turn it in such a way that the specular reflection hits you, the specular is another component. And then at the same time, this remote control has a bit of a metallic. It has a metallic finish, like a brushed metallic finish. That's another component of the light that comes back. And then of course some of this, there's a slight tint, a slightly bluish tint to this metallic sheen. You can see it in the fringe. Look at that bluish fringe. So moral of the story is whenever I deal with lighting, I don't like to say that's just a blue, that's just a green, that's a this color, that's that color. It's you know, you have many different things going on all at once. Okay. So we're going to have lots of little crevices in there. So I can just take the airbrush, spray it on, and then trim it. Trim it away, like that. You know, as I spray, you know, it's creating this deepening crevice. This is where you have the areas of underexposure. Then you have to trim. Look at that. This is the ambient occlusion that I was talking about, that underexposure as well. So you've got to deal with two things. You have to deal with the overexposure of your specular light and overexposure of intense light sources. You have to deal with underexposure of the crevices. And to do that, you'll find that the overexposed stuff tends to be very the cores tend to be very bright and white, whereas for underexposed stuff, because it's ambient occlusion, you'll tend to have to use a soft brush. But these overexposed areas here, let me go over them with an additive brush. So I'll just go up to the additive layer and let me just add an empty image there. Okay. You know, if I've got yellowish white light coming down, you know, I can I can put a sheen on those. Right. On the other hand, if these areas were grassy, you know, there's a grassy material, like a chlorophyll shader, you know, I might have to put slightly different tint on it. It's really dependent on the material. So you can't just think, oh, this is a rock, this is rock, this is grass. You have to think about what kind of light is striking your material and what are the optical characteristics of your material. Okay, and then let's suppose I'm going to just throw in one more layer. Let's do the diffuse component. This is the great thing about dealing with layers, is that you can do things out of order. You see, I can just apply the shading. You know, I can work underneath my specular highlights. I'm not using any special brush, it's just a circular brush. And then these areas here, this big mountain is going to be casting kind of a shadow on things, so I have to be aware of that. And I'm kind of mixing in a little bit of my greens with my yellows. Oops, it's too dark over there. I have to crank that up. One thing that people, that a lot of beginners have trouble with is choosing colors. And what the result is, they spend a long time choosing one color and they use it everywhere. And as a result, they get something that looks really flat and, well, kind of gross looking. But the thing is, that all over your scene are constantly changing lighting situations and, you know, constantly changing lighting conditions. And so there's no single one color that you can just kind of throw everywhere and hope that it's the magic bullet and that it'll work. It'll look like crap. That's what happens. Now, there's a little bit of a there's a little bit of a method to my madness, and that is that whenever I have a green patch, I tend to have, green patches that's sort of a healthy grass. But what I do is I surround those green patches with kind of browner, progressively browner and browner patches. And then areas like this slope here are perfectly vertical. Things tend to not like growing on perfectly vertical slopes. If anything, you'll get like a few mosses and scraggly lichens and fungi, which will grow on the vertical surfaces. So I tend to leave those fairly bare and stony, and maybe just throw in a few scraggly bits. The thing is that large plants tend not to grow on vertical surfaces. The more vertical the surface is, the smaller the plants you get on it. Whereas the more horizontal and flat the surface is, the more, generally the more topsoil tends to stay on the flat surfaces. And also in the valleys is where you'll get a lot of moisture collecting. And water likes to run downwards, likes to seek the lowest point. This is where you have a lot of good dirt. And where you have dirt and a lot of moisture, you'll have plants. Sometimes to the point where you got like a little river. In which case, oddly enough, plants will not grow if there's too much moisture, unless the water is stagnant, in which case you get a different type of plant. So the thing is that you have to look at your environment as consisting of various niches, various changing lighting conditions, various living conditions. You'll find that some areas are suited to some plants. Some plants like the shade, some plants like the sun, some like moisture. You're going to get different plants in different places depending on the lighting conditions, depending on the water conditions. If it's a slope, different plants have different preferences. So it's not something that you can just kind of say grass everywhere, trees everywhere. It never works like that. The thing is that not only are you trying to create an optical illusion of form, you're also trying to create an optical illusion of, a living space. Okay, so you've got your overexposed areas, you've got your underexposed areas, you've got your sky, you have your mid-tone diffuse reemission. I think this area is maybe a little too overblown. I think I'll probably go back and do it and just, I can just slowly erase away some of those. In fact, I think I'll just keep just a little sheen of it up there. Just tone that down. Same with this one. I think I'll just tone that down a bit. Right, with every stroke, you want to be reinforcing your illusion. And if you find that with each stroke, it's not reinforcing the illusion, then you'd better stop what you're doing and maybe think about what you're going to do next and what you need to do. Sit back and kind of question yourself, what do you want the painting to do? What's the painting missing? Okay, so that's all I wanted to talk about today, was just, how to deal with overexposure and underexposure. Wound up talking a lot more about this stuff than I intended, but anyway, I guess that's it. Anyway, I'll see you guys later.